So welcome everyone to this SEBA cast, and I'm here with Lorraine Kingsley. I'm delighted to be chatting to you, Lorraine, because Lorraine, you're going to be one of our speakers at our Ministers Leaders Conference in February next year, 2026. So we're really looking forward to inviting you and enjoying what you have to say. But tell us a little bit, so people get a bit of a taste of who you are. Tell us a little bit about who is Lorraine Kingsley.
Oh, interesting. Well, the first thing to say about who is Lorraine Kingsley is that I'm, as all my friends would say, I'm never succinct. So it's unlikely that I'll be able to give you who I am in 20 seconds or 30 seconds, but I will give it my best. People always start by saying who they're married to, don't they, and how many children they have. So I feel like that's just, I'll say I'm married to Vern, been married for over 30 years. We've got 3 children, all now adult children. 2 are at uni and 1 has come back home in order to save before he moves away and launches his music career. And we've got a dog and I've got a dog and Vern's got 2 cats. And one of my favourite things to do is to walk my dog along the beach, because we live in Bournemouth, very close to the sea. And that is my favourite time of the day, to walk the dog, hopefully get up in time for sunrise, but that doesn't always happen. I love to listen to Lectio. I love to chat to God as I'm walking along the beach. I'm somebody that connects with nature. I think people talk about it as being blue and green people. I connect with the sea. I connect with living near the New Forest, and just love to be in nature. That's where I find myself.
When I say to people, Lorraine Kingsley's come to speak to us, they go, who? And then I say toilet twinning, and they get really excited about
When I used to travel in Africa, I used to get introduced as the toilet lady. I'm pretty sure when I went to school and I did careers days, and people asked me, and I did those kind of psychosometric things and worked out what I was good at. I'm pretty sure I never thought I would end up the toilet lady, but the Lord works in mysterious ways.
But before you became CEO of Toilet Twinning, what were you doing before then?
So after university, before university, I did a 1-year course in newspaper journalism, and then I am old enough for going to uni not to have cost me anything. And I think we were in a recession at the time, and I think all my journalism lecturers said, "Oh, you should go to uni and do a degree." So I did a degree, and then after that, I worked in newspapers and radio for a little while. The brilliant plan was to work in TV. And I particularly thought that I would be the next Kate Adie, and I would be a war correspondent with the BBC. I darkened the BBC door with many a show reel and an application. I had some interviews. Hubby Vern loved those days because he got to sit in the reception of BBC Centre and kind of spot famous people while I was having another tragic interview somewhere that didn't end up with them offering me a job. So we jacked everything in. We sold up our house, much to our parents' delight. We sold our house, we sold everything we owned. We went travelling around the world for a year, which was really quite wonderful. And then came back and thought, really need to do something about what I'm going to do with my working life. And at the time, my church was doing a passion and gifting course. I think they were hoping that we would have a passion and a gifting for youth work, or putting out chairs, or serving teas and coffees on a Sunday morning. But a very good friend of mine, who is now a church leader, she said, "Well, Lorraine, you're passionate about justice for people living in poverty." And my gift at the time was in writing as a newspaper journalist. And so put the two together and applied for jobs, went and worked at the NGO Tear Fund for a few years on staff, and then worked when we had small children, had a kind of like extensive time of being a consultant for various charities, mainly the charity sector. So did some consultancy with charities like the Bible Society and Open Doors, and still did some consultancy with Tear Fund. And then got the call in 2011. There was this little idea floating around called toilet twinning, and I didn't have the brilliant idea for toilet twinning, but it had been a kind of embryo and nobody quite knew what to do with it. And I think they'd been trying to get it off the ground for about a year. And I got the call, could I basically babysit this thing while they came up with an exit strategy and closed it down because they couldn't find a way to make it work. And those were glorious days in toilet twinning.
So let me get this right. So they asked you to find a way of closing toilet twinning down.
Yeah.
Was it? It just wasn't successful.
It basically hadn't made any money. So it had a website and hadn't made any money. And so it had originally been just a very short-term 3-month campaign with one of its founding charities, Cord, which is Christian Outreach, Relief and Development, a small peace and reconciliation charity. And they'd kind of like created it and run it for 3 months and and it became their most successful campaign ever. So they thought, oh, this thing has legs but we're very small. I think they only supported water and sanitation in 2 countries, Burundi and Chad. And so they looked around for another NGO to partner with who had global reach. And so Tear Fund entered into a partnership with them. And then that partnership kind of like tried a few things for about 6 or 9 months and just nothing was working. And so as a consultant who was doing various other things and was known to Tear Fund, they asked me, yes, would I close it down? And so I said, well, let's have a play and see what we can do. And they were great days because there were no expectations. In fact, it was the opposite. I didn't have any expectations to manage. I didn't have any targets. I didn't have anyone saying, what's your annual plan or what's your 3-year plan or your 5-year plan? It was literally nobody wanted me to do anything. And then after a few months, I said, well, I've got some ideas. Big fan of The Apprentice. And I said, let's take this to events and let's do on-the-spot twinning. And I thought it'll be fun. It'll be like an episode of The Apprentice, which was kind of yes and no. I mean, it was one of those infamous kind of episodes of The Apprentice because it just took off.
I've got this picture in my head of you kind of rushing around doing mad things.
Oh, it was crazy. So we were at New Wine and it had been predicted in advance of us going by my beloved colleagues at Tear Fund that we would do about 7 a day. So we didn't take much stock with us. We took a printer. My husband Vern was hunched over the printer, printing out certificates in real time. And then obviously people could choose which country they wanted to twin with. They could personalise their certificates. And on the penultimate day of the first week, we did over 100 toilet twins in just one day. We had 3 children under the age of 5 and we didn't leave the stand for 12 hours. Our children were completely feral. But that was the beginning of us thinking there might be something in this. And we started to realise that if people had toilet twins in front of them and could see it as a visual thing, it's very hard to market toilet twinning without the product because everything about toilet twinning sells itself. People always say, oh, I've seen one in a toilet, I've got them in my church, So, and then we were like, okay, let's get toilet twins in really high profile places. Let's get them in service stations or on loo doors. Let's get them in churches, or cathedrals where a lot of people visit. So that became the strategy in the early days. Let's get everybody seeing a toilet twin somewhere. And then hopefully this thing will grow and sell itself. And it did.
So when we chatted, didn't we, before, when I was on sabbatical, we kind of met up. And when you told me a bit about the story, you particularly spoke about the importance in leadership of being agile. We live in a context now where there is kind of constant change going on. And things like toilet twinning, we can try the traditional approaches, but suddenly you kind of try something different and it suddenly takes off. What are you learning about what it looks like to be agile?
In the early days, it was just Vern and I sort of bouncing off each other. Every time I kind of broke something in the IT world, he would fix it. When I couldn't do something, Vern could. But as it grew and as we saw a move of God, and as we just brought our fish and our loaves and just brought what we thought and our best idea and said, but this is it was always God's charity. It was always this toilet twinning was God's. And so it wasn't my baby, although obviously I had a huge investment in it because I was part of its founding story and seeing it take off. But we always were mindful that, well, this is God's work in God's kingdom to bring the transformation of water and sanitation to people in poverty. And so we were always mindful of our why. We were always mindful of why we were doing what we were doing. So we tried really hard not to get just stuck into the what. When things are really busy in those days, you have to stay focused on why we do what we do. And so it was really important also to really honour our supporters really well. And so one of the things when we grew and when we started to take on team members, which was terrifying as well as exciting, and it was like that kind of, when I realised that I'd run out of me and I didn't have enough hours in the day, I had to start working out what are things I'm doing that other people could do potentially better than me. What do I bring that is unique to me, or where am I best using my time? And then trying to get other people to do other things. And so Toilet Twinning grew from just me and Vern to a team of 12 eventually, all doing wonderful things. But we just had to be mindful at each step of each time we took on staff or we kind of like shifted up a gear, we had to have the processes and systems in place to make that work. But we never wanted to be run by our processes and our systems. We wanted our processes and our systems to underpin us being able to move. People would say we moved very quickly. I would see an opportunity and we would try and make it happen within sometimes as quick as 24 or 48 hours, which was wonderful, but also really hard to do.
There is this tension, isn't there, in the world that we live in, that there are processes, there are policies, there are kind of systems, there is institution that's kind of existed for years and years, and ways of being. Sometimes that's written down and sometimes that's just in the ether, that everyone knows this is kind of how it should happen. And then when you got someone like you who's a very kind of forward-thinking leader, there must be moments of deep frustration when you're trying to move something forward. When everything else seems to be kind of holding you backwards. Is that true? Or
That's true. And I think one thing I learned is that I was kind of spared from burnout, but I kind of had a mini kind of burnout probably 3 years into, just when we were gone from startup to kind of levelling out and kind of going into not really maintenance mode. Toilet Twinning was never in maintenance mode. It was always just moving from one phase to another. But it became a little bit more of an organisation. We had staff and we needed to look after our staff well and have structure. But I think people could start to see that I was getting a bit ragged, probably before I did. And what was really wonderful was that God, over the phase of about 3 to 6 months, God brought 3 different people into my life who offered mentoring. And each brought a different perspective. And sometimes they would just draw diagrams on napkins over a cup of coffee. So I would buy the coffee or the lunch and they would offer to mentor me for free because Toilet Twinning didn't have any money in the early days. But they inputted into me by making me think about things, or they would say, so one of my mentors said to me, Lorraine, you're always in the future. So one of my strength finders is futuristic. And so I naturally live at least 12 months in the future, probably 18 to 24 months in the future. And I can see it. That can be a strength, but our greatest strengths are always our greatest weaknesses. Because my mentor was like, Lorraine, nobody else can see it. So you've got to spend the time explaining how you're going to get from here to there. And what steps because I just naturally, I know it's going to sound a bit weird, I'm going to sound a bit geeky, which I don't really like for a creative person, but I can see a Gantt chart in my head. So I can just see a timeline and I can see all the steps. But the negative part of that in my creative entrepreneurial makeup is that I don't really like having to slow down and explain myself to other people. But I've got a husband who goes, well, that's a terrible idea, or that'll never work. And then I realised that I have to spend the time explaining the steps so that people can go, oh, we can see it now.
I'm completely with you, Lorraine, because the number of meetings I sometimes sit in and people go, but how are we going to get there, Joth? And I'm like, well, don't you see the path? Can't you see it? Surely it's obvious, isn't it? And you suddenly realise, no, it's not obvious to them. And it's interesting that you call yourself a kind of futurist person. Is that the term you use?
Futuristic, I think, is one of the Strength Finders qualities.
I don't think we think about other different personality differences in groups, but often we don't think about those who actually love to live in the past and those who actually want to live in the future, and what a gift those two things can be, but also huge tension as well. And of course, in the life of the church, you've got all those people. You've got people that love the past and want you just to go back to the past. And then you've got those others that are pushing you forward or pulling you forward and saying, come over here, which can be a huge tension in a community.
And I think if you're working by yourself, then being someone who can live in the future and be strategic is great, and you only really have to explain that to yourself. But as soon as you start to build a team, as soon as you're in an infrastructure, and I think of whatever size, as I say, in the early days, it was Vern and I, and we can shortcut communication, sometimes not in a good way for our marriage. But once you've got a team, I would say of anything 2+, you've got to start working out, how do we live in the now? I was going to use kingdom terminology, but you've got to live in the now as well as the not yet. And so because both are real. So if I'm living all the time seeing where we're headed for 18 to 24 months from now, which I think is what leaders are, I think that is leadership as opposed to management. But in small organisations, you end up doing both. But somebody has to manage the day-to-day to make sure that the organisation is healthy today, because otherwise you will, if you're constantly living in the future and you're not mindful of your organisation and what it needs in the moment, you haven't got the health, you haven't got the platform upon which to grow. So I think my sense, and I've watched this over I guess I've had enough time to watch what happens when you do agility without the platform, and everything just starts to creak a bit. And I think that comes from living in the future, but not looking after the moment.
Lorraine, that's really fantastic, and you've just touched on a whole lot. I wish we had more time, but we've got to kind of keep this podcast concise, because otherwise people won't come to the conference, will they?
I did say I wasn't concise at the beginning, though. I come with a health warning.
I've got no more to say. No, I know that you've got loads more to offer, and it'd be great at the conference to hear a little bit more of the story of toilet twinning, because it did just take off, and you were kind of on the back foot trying to catch up with what God was doing to some extent.
And talking about it now, I can talk about it as being very exciting, and it was. But most of the time, as you say, I felt out of my depth. I felt inadequate for the task, and and it was all so foggy. It was all so unknown that you had no idea of what you were doing, because we don't have the benefit, do we, of living in hindsight. We have to move forward. I had no idea if the things that we were doing were going to work or not. You just have to think, well, it seems like the right thing to do, and as long as we're not betting too much on an idea, and we're giving it, I'm not a big fan of pilot or trial language, because I personally think we have to give our whole self to something, and not think that there is an opportunity to kind of like, oh well, we'll just see how it goes and then sort of like back out I think we have to give it everything, but also have a plan for what to do if it isn't a good idea, because not every idea is a good idea.
Well, we're really looking forward to you sharing a little bit more about that journey, what your experience, what you've learned. I know you've done an MA as well on is it MA on leadership?
Yeah, I did it. Yeah, I did my master's on what the qualities that is needed for a pioneer leader or an entrepreneurial leader to be successful. I don't like the word success, but I think we're nervous about the word success around the kingdom. But in order to be fruitful.
Yeah, that's great. So we look forward to hearing more about that, hearing a bit more about your journey, and also we're at the conference hearing a little bit about your reflections, because you're now in a church context. So you're are you a vicar now?
I am a curate in Church of England terminology. So I went from, Vern and I have worshipped in all, I think we've done Methodist, Baptist, Free Evangelical, and Vineyard, and then the Lord mysteriously called me to the Church of England about 5-6 years ago. And so now I am an ordained priest in the Church of England, and I still can't quite believe I say those words. But
yeah. And it'd be interesting to hear the two different contexts of working in a charity kind of organisation with a small team, and then find yourself in a community of God's people, which all, everyone, no one's paid, well, other than the vicar perhaps, and one or two others, but everyone else is voluntary, and what that looks like going forward. And I'm sure there's some interesting challenges. And of course, that's the context that many of our ministers and leaders will be working within. But thank you so much for your time now. We really look forward to seeing you again in February. So
can't wait.
Yeah, God bless you, and see you in February.
Thank you very much.